Well, this is exciting.
It is.
All right. Thanks for sitting down with me today, Anya. Why don't we start by having you introduce yourself and give a little background on your history in heavy industry?
Sure. So Ania Mueller, I'm currently based in Calgary. My background, I guess, just from the very beginning. So I'm an engineer by background, and I've spent almost 15 years now in heavy industry. So a majority of my experience has been in oil and gas. And my roles have been project management, program management, been out on the construction site. And then the most recent part of my career was actually focused on contracts management. So I was working on a really big capital project, and my team was managing over $1 billion worth of contracts. And so, that's what my background has been. And I think going through that experience, it's really helped me understand the problem that PayShepherd solves. So I'm happy to be here, part of the team that's coming up with the solution.
It's awesome. Yeah, $1 billion. That's a big responsibility. How many people get
With a
that
B.
opportunity in their career?
Yeah, I mean, not many, not many. I feel like going through it initially was kind of like a bit of a heart stop moment when you kind of get, you look at the scope that you're going to be managing, and it's kind of like whoa, can I do this? But going through this, it really just going through it, I mean, and going through that experience, it was just honestly like a once in a career sort of opportunity. And I learned so much, and I'm so grateful for it.
So when you're talking about managing contracts in excess of $1 billion, how much does the team around you matter?
I mean, without the team around you, you really can't do your job. The team around you is the people that help keep things moving with the contractors every single day, everything from very administrative, very burdensome sort of tasks, all the way to like understanding what's going out in the field and being the foundation for that relationship with the contractor. And so without that team, and I think about that in terms of who was on my direct team, without them, you can't be successful. There's no way. And they also bring so much of their own knowledge. When you think about a team of that size and collectively, they probably had, I want to do the quick math without insulting anyone's age or anything, probably collectively 300 years of experience of contract management on major capital projects. And it's really humbling when you think about it in that way. And then I think the greater team beyond that, like your peers and the senior leadership on that team is crucial to making sure that everyone's kind of pulling in the same direction.
Yeah, contract compliance, from my perspective, especially on large scale projects, is an enormous task. What were some of the biggest challenges that you faced, Anya?
Yeah, I mean that's a loaded question in and of itself. It is it's a huge challenge. I think the biggest thing that we faced was really just not having tools in place that made both parties successful. So you were put in a situation where two parties were trying to consolidate and reconcile thousands, if not millions, of lines of data, and they were doing it in their own systems. And while those systems may have worked really well in isolation, when you put those things against each other and you need to reconcile that creates a lot of manual work. It creates a lot of thankless work. It creates a lot of room for error, whether it's intentional or not. And the unfortunate part about that is if it's an unintentional error, that unintentional error then has consequences to the relationship, the working relationship you have with the other side, with the contractor. And then the downstream impact of that is you're burning dollars trying to reconcile dollars, and that can be very demotivating for a team, and obviously go against what the company is trying to achieve in terms of delivering something on time and on schedule. And just that time suck of having to manually look at items to make sure that they're in compliance with the contract, when that time could obviously be used elsewhere. But when you get professionals who have amazing experience put in a position where they just have to do what feels like very manual tasks over and over again, you end up not leveraging the talent that you have on your team. And I think like that's a big part of it as well.
It's a great perspective. So if you think about large industrial operator and a contracted workforce that's both mission oriented out to get the job done, have high domain and pride in the work they're doing. There's a commercial relationship that exists between the two entities, but at the end of the day, there's humans and people that care, that have to reconcile when things go wrong. In your view, having seen multiple relationships between large industrial and contractors, how do you set the basis of a great relationship such that if and should something happen, that you can work through it?
Mm. Yeah, that's a great question. I think if someone had that hacked, they would be doing very well for themselves.
Yeah.
But things that I've seen, work well is making sure that very clear processes are established from the onset, right? So anyone who's been in the projects world, here's, the kickoff sets the tone. The kickoff will help drive success, or you can make or break a project on a kickoff. Like that might seem like an extreme statement, but I think when it comes down to it, what the message there is setting very clear expectations and making sure that both sides are aligned to those expectations and truly believe and sign off on those expectations from the get-go. And I think that can really help set the tone. And then I think that there's a lot of consistency that needs to happen from both sides, the owner and the contractor, to make sure that interactions are consistent with those expectations, and making sure that throughout every layer of the organization, that kind of permeates. Now, the challenge is like it's really, really hard to maintain that consistency, especially when you're on a mega project or really any project. You have so many different relationships in a team that's then interacting with a team that's equal or greater in size. So that's the challenge. But I think to answer your question, it really is about setting expectations and making sure that proper processes are in place, and then really trying to do what you can to drive that consistency to reach the desired outcome.
Nice. I love that. Like you've called out something really important, which is the importance and prioritization of a solid kickoff, as that tends to set the tone for months, days, months, weeks, years to come. What does good look like from a kickoff perspective for you? Because there's rituals and that tend to happen that would lead you to believe that it would be helpful for a great outcome for both organizations. What does good look like from your perspective?
So that's a great question. I will caveat the statement with it. Every project is different. Every situation is different. But if I had my magic wand, the way that I would love to approach kickoffs is prior to the kickoff, whoever is accountable for it, so it's typically a project manager, works collaboratively with the equivalent on the other side, to determine the agenda. So right away, that sets the tone for, hey, we're doing this together. And there's a genuine desire to do this together. So both sides are considering each other's inputs. And I think as a key member, as a project manager, you can really help drive and kind of set the foundation for that culture. So the two parties work together to determine the agenda, and it would be a very typical sort of alignment on schedule, alignment on goals, alignment on expectations, and then there needs to be that team component. So depending on the resources and the time that you have, bringing in the key folks into the room for that kickoff and kind of creating a dialogue, making sure that those people start talking early. And then also making sure that there's a bit of an informal part. Maybe you go for a coffee, a meal. I don't know, maybe you can go bowling together if time permits. Having that like icebreaker right off the bat kind of humanizes what you're trying to do. I think that's really important because oftentimes when you're in these long projects, things become less human. People get tired. People make decisions based on emotion, whether that's right or wrong. And I think it's just always to remember that we are all human and we are all wanting to succeed in our own way. And to do that, you need to act as a team. So I think that's the cherry on top, if you can make that sort of human interaction real. And then I think, after the kickoff, there's always going to be things that you want to summarize for your team to make sure that they are remembering that as a really good experience, and material that you can not only share to those in attendance, but others that weren't able to attend that kickoff, because naturally some of these projects have hundreds, if not thousands of people. And so by creating some kind of summary content and impactful items that were discussed and like mutual goals that were set, and then sharing those outwardly towards the team, cascading those down, kind of speaks to trying to permeate that culture at the very beginning of the project.
Great. You talked about the importance of a kickoff and the different ceremonies that exist within and how that can contribute to like setting everything off on the right foot. Now, 6 months goes by, 9 months, a year. At some point, it's great to check in and see how you're measuring up at a high level to what you had collectively committed to. What do those check-in meetings, performance reviews with your vendors, what does good look like from your perspective?
Yeah, so like in my previous experience, we did annual check-ins with vendors that had their work was more done on an annual basis. So they would say do a bunch of small projects in a year. And so we would do check-ins with them on an annual basis. And then I've also done ones where they're more of a monthly check-in because they're required because of the scope of work that they're doing and it being so big. So I guess I'll just share so the question is like what good looks like. I think it depends on the scope of work that the contractor is completing and how that's being managed. So when I think about those annual review cycles, what good looks like is saying to the vendor that, hey, we're going to do this annual review, and you outline, what are the things we're going to talk about? We're going to talk about how many times you met your budget, how many times did you meet your schedule. We're going to talk about feedback that we received from multiple parties within the organization that worked with you. But to make that conversation take that from good to great, you want to make sure that the contractor also feels like they have a seat at the table in this, that it is a true dialogue, because that's what a relationship is. It's a two-way street. And so what we would do is we would tell the contractors, hey, come prepared to talk about your perception of, okay, if you went over budget, why? We want to know, what was your side of the story? Talk about any challenges you had in the schedule. That's an opportunity for maybe to highlight that the work that was assigned to you maybe wasn't done in the most efficient way, and we value that feedback. And then we also said, come ready to talk to our teams about how it was working with them and feedback, and it's a safe space, and not everyone will be there, and that's done by design so that you do feel like there's a safe space to share opportunities for improvement. So I think when you have an opportunity to do that with a contractor on an annual basis in a certain like a fit for purpose way, I think having that, giving them a large chunk of that agenda and asking for that contribution is not only setting an expectation and of accountability with them, like a shared accountability, but it's also being really genuine in your intent of that meeting, trying to develop the relationship. On the other side, when you're dealing with a scope that is much larger and you have those more frequent check-ins, I think a lot of the performance check-ins we've had that I have experienced in the past can be unfortunately a little bit challenging to navigate. The tensions are high, the workload is high, but what I've seen be done very effectively is that the right people were in the room. And by that, I mean, there was always an equal match of senior leadership to senior leadership. So someone from each side representing that. And then as you cascaded down to, say, the project manager level, somebody of the equivalent on the other side would also be there. And what that allowed everyone to do is to share appropriate information at the level to which they were privy to the information. A lot of the time, challenges and solutions can come up at a very senior level. But to make sure that the right decision is being made, the people that are dealing with that problem on a day-to-day basis should be there to provide the appropriate context to that. And I think having that right combination can really increase the efficiency and effectiveness of those meetings.
I've spent many years on the vendor side or the contractor side of the table, and have been involved in 360 performance reviews where as a contractor, you're invited to provide feedback to the client on their execution. And as an operator, how do you make sure that you're giving the safe space for vendors to provide feedback to their clients? I've had experiences in both realms where vendors are invited to provide feedback, and pointed feedback is provided and it's not well received. And equally, I've experienced clients that run towards the feedback, and there's a
Yeah.
cultural element there. And how do you ensure you get the most out of, if that is the strategy, how do you get the most out of that?
Mm. I, I think that's a great question. Um, I'm reflecting right now because I don't have the full answer in terms of just my past experience, but I'm reflecting on people that I've seen, mentors of mine, senior leaders that I've had the opportunity to work with, and they've been really good at taking feedback from both sides of the owner organization and the contractor, and creating a culture of accountability and motivation, like mutual motivation and mutual success in the team. So I'm trying to reflect on like the behaviors that they show up with and what they've kind of led by example with. And the one thing that really sticks out to me is having the humility to take ownership in the moment when there's feedback that's provided. And so especially if it's constructive feedback that's provided about a member of the team or how something's functioning, I've seen those leaders really kind of step up and take ownership of what they can. Sometimes that just means acknowledging that there is a challenge in place and committing to looking further into that. So I think that creates an environment where people are truly feeling safe to say, okay, I've shared with you what my challenge is, and like there's hope. I feel the hope that this will be heard. And then I think you really need to stand by your word. If you're saying this is a safe space and there's no repercussion, it comes down to the integrity of your word, and I think that pays dividends down the road for the relationship.
Like, why did you choose engineering as a discipline in school, and how did that help from a contracts perspective in the execution of $1 billion worth of work?
Why did I choose engineering? I mean, there's like your stereotypical, I was always really good at math and science, and uh, it just kind of was easy for me. I have a lot of family members that are within the engineering field, and so I think it wasn't intimidating to think about that process, and I knew a lot about it. And so I think that if I'm being really truthful, it's a lot of it was like I knew quite a bit about it, felt comfortable because I knew I had a really good support around me. I was good at math and science, and that stuff really interested me. And it was kind of a fairly clear career path. And as someone who likes knowing what they're getting themselves into for the most part, I guess it was appealing that way. But I really like the problem solving, and kind of equations made sense to me, I guess, and sometimes English did not. So that's kind of, I guess, how I ended up there. But so I feel like I'm rambling. I actually always wanted to be a doctor, and my original plan was to go to engineering school and then use that as an undergrad and get into med school. But life happens, and your interests change. So I kind of just stuck it out with engineering. I don't regret it at all. How that helped with contract management. So I think the fact that I went through engineering and then had experience on site, on construction sites from the time I was on my internship, really gave me an early perspective on the challenges and the administrative burden of executing work, and actually seeing what happens in the field with contractors. So I'll never forget, like, I was an intern. I was asked to go and do some progress reporting that would essentially then result in what the contractor got paid for their month. And I will never forget being out there, and it was the lead foreman was doing the inspection with me, and he was like, well, this isn't done now, but it'll be done by end of day. And I remember just being like, that's really scary. What do I do? Because you feel intimidated by somebody who has like 30 plus years of experience, and you have like 6 months of experience. And but I'll never forget kind of getting the gusto to be like, well, it's not done now, so it's not done on paper, right? what will get done will be paid out next month. And then so it was like that to me was a real like TSN turning point in terms of like understanding how that world could work if you didn't kind of learn about it. And so that moment kind of always stuck in my mind as an opportunity to learn more about how to effectively manage work. And then when I got into contracts management, I think understanding the context of how work actually got done in the field and how the words and letters on paper translated into actions just helped me learn really quickly about contracts and provide real life context to the words, and that in and of itself is really valuable. There's always going to be people who know more about me, more than me about contracts. But what I can bring to the table is like, okay, but think about it from the field's perspective. And I think that's what, helped really contribute to that experience.
As a contracts professional, a lot of time can be spent working in, data entry or clerical work. Um, now imagine that you had an opportunity to change that. You have a magic wand, and then all that work goes away. What is the time as a contracts professional better spent doing?
I think that time back could be spent on doing a lot more proactive things. So I think when I think about the project organizations I've been a part of, contracts professionals within the supply chain team have always been dubbed as service providers, or they're partners to the project. But to be true partners and to move away from that nomenclature of providing just a service, but really come and contribute as a partner, you should be doing very proactive things. So that's things like trending, looking at data, seeing if there's anything that the project management team can use to have conversations with the client, either around productivity or about maybe there's trends that we're seeing in change orders that are looking suspiciously, common, and maybe the project management team wants to be made aware of that. And it's really challenging when you are so pulled down and bogged down with that contractual administrative part. It's hard to make the time to contribute in that really proactive way. And then I think, becoming a bit more, when you become proactive, you add a lot of value to the team versus being really reactive because you're just used to things coming in your way and then having to react to them. The other thing is, when you think about the contacts that contract management professionals have with, and by contacts, I mean their peers, their equivalent on the contractor side. If you have time that's freed up because you don't do the very burdensome things, you can start to pick up the phone more. You can start to have those conversations more and say, hey, I'm seeing this. Did you mean to do that? And really try and come from a place of understanding. And that inherently builds a relationship. If you don't have that time to be proactive, the reactive cycle creates tension. Again, probably unintentional, but it creates tension. And so I just think about all of these really high value things that you could be doing if you didn't really have that just manual, very cumbersome work to deal with.
So Anya, other than the vast amount of time invested in clerical data entry work, what are some of the other concerns that can come up?
So definitely data integrity is a really big one. When you have any sort of human intervention, taking a source of data, translating it over, trying to manipulate it to make sure that it's accurate. So by manipulate, I mean using your pivot tables and checking that, things match. Anytime you have that human intervention, there's room for data integrity issues. And that kind of, can go a really long way. You can translate that all the way back to if you're sharing files, and do you really have the most accurate timestamp on it and things like that. And it may seem like a really little problem at the time, but if you ever get into a situation where you're trying to decide whether a change order is valid, or if in the unfortunate situation you get into a claim with a contractor and you have to look back on those records, it's really challenging if you're questioning whether the timestamp or the information in there is accurate. So data integrity is a really big piece. And then I think the sheer volume of work is also a challenge. And so you like to, you want to plan for the project that's coming your way or for the work that's coming your way. But their projects are unpredictable, and you're for sure going to get hit with huge waves and volumes of work. And if you're just relying on humans, it's really easy for humans to get burnt out when they're just getting hit with a lot of conflict over and over. They're getting hit with a lot of volume and requests for urgent turnaround times. You really risk burning out your workforce, and ultimately the sustainability of the team and what you're trying to achieve could come into question. And I guess one of the other things that comes to mind is all the little details. Some of these agreements have, not only are they hundreds of pages in total length, but then when it comes down to the pure rate sheets, you're being asked to monitor sometimes hundreds of rate sheets on a job. And so I think that there's so many little details within the contract and the rate sheet, and there's so many little nuances that it's hard to expect that every single little detail will be caught and monitored. And that confidence in what your team is able to check and validate, it can waver over time, because it's natural for a human to accidentally drop a thing or two there. And again, the impact of that may seem small in the moment, but if there's ever items that get called into question down the road, it can cause more friction points between the owner and the contractor.
So Ania, what are some of the other items or elements that can surface when there's a non-compliance?
Yeah, so I think that they are, there's varying impacts. So I guess the first thing is if there's an immediate non-compliance identified, and it's been able to be identified quickly and acknowledged by the other party, then it can be quickly fixed, and you can continue to move on. But over time, if there are things that build up with non-compliance, again, whether it's intentional or unintentional, at the end of the day, it has to meet the intent of the contract. And so if you come to a place where you've realized that there's been systemic non-compliance, it can create a lot of friction points. And I guess the most extreme example is, you go into a formal dispute, you have a legal claim, and all those records that contributed to that point where you're at right now with legal compliance need to have a look at. And when you get to that point, or need to be reviewed, sorry. And when you get to that point with a vendor or contractor, usually that relationship has been heavily eroded. And the reason for that is, to get to that point, you've probably gone through multiple different types of escalations, mediation, other escalations, formal letters, looking at records, and you've not been able to reach an agreement. And when you think about that whole process and the resources required, whether it's humans, whether it's programs, whether it's looking at emails or spreadsheets, all of that is a huge resource drain. And what it's done is it's gotten to a point of formalizing the conflict. And so that's why I say that at that point, the relationship is often eroded. And unfortunately, it usually takes, if you're able to salvage it for future business relationships, it probably takes some time and a reset on a lot of things. So I think, you can look at it in both, or I guess the spectrum of, if you can resolve it right away, great. But oftentimes that buildup can result in something that is a very challenging and kind of an unfortunate outcome for both parties.
Ania, what was the most challenging part of your day in contracts management?
Honestly, there are two main challenges. First and foremost, it was the constant conflict. I know some people who are exceptional at being in the contract space and contractor management, and there's something about how they're wired where they just thrive from like engaging in this like conflict that they view as a sort of like a means to an end to that goal. And I have a lot of respect for somebody who can do that day in and day out. Unfortunately, I learned that's not me. I am not somebody who thrives on having to go through that type of conflict with somebody else day in and day out. So that was my own personal challenge. And then the other one is just seeing how much the team was spending on just manual systemic work that was ripe for error. And then they were doing the best that they could, but it just felt like they didn't have the right tools in place. And I'll never forget someone on the team saying to me, you know what, we just need to invest in a way to remove the person from this process. And obviously they were referring to having, a tool that could help facilitate that work. But it was really, disappointing to see that the team didn't have those tools. And so all of this knowledge that they had of contracts management was unfortunately being, that was being used on really like a lot of manual administrative work rather than really elevating the actual contracts management piece.
So Ania, we started the conversation talking about the importance of kickoff and human connection as it relates to project execution and contracts management. Large-scale industrial projects can often be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and it can be very demanding on those participating. And also from a contracts management perspective, is there anything you can share that will help inform how you achieve balance for yourself as a contracts professional or the contracts team that you're leading that would help you navigate that?
Yeah, I mean that's such a good question, because it is, when I describe that environment when you're executing a project and you're in peak construction season, it's a total grind. Reflecting on the team that I was working with, some of those folks were working on shifts that were like 21 days on. And oftentimes you're living out in a remote location, perhaps at a camp. You don't really have a place to call home. It can be really isolating. And I think it's really important to reconnect with people as humans, right? So we talked about how at that kickoff, you're humanizing the situation. You're really trying to remind yourselves that, hey, we're a team, we're going to achieve this together. And I think as the project goes on and you hit those relentless cycles of work, it's important as a leader to just ground on that, on the human commonalities and what you're trying to achieve. And I think it's important to just like take the time to check in on people. When you get into that world, you just get into the cycle of just like wanting to go and go and go and go. And sometimes it takes somebody just going, hey, how are you today? And just checking in and taking the moment and trying to find ways to give people breaks here and there, and trying to, ask like, hey, if you're out in like a remote site, like checking in, have you had a chance to connect with anyone out there? It kind of creates that permission to kind of like go, meet someone that you might be working with, and have dinner with them. And in times when it's really lonely, it's really important for a leader to remind people that it's not just about the work, it's about taking care of yourself as well. And then when you create that space for people to talk to you about that, it can really help change the trajectory of where their mind is at. So, but Wes, I'd love to hear your take on it. I know you've had some probably really interesting experiences that are similar.
Way to go, Anya. Flip the script, eh? Can be really challenging, and probably a few people have truly figured it out. I think the important part to solve for early is having a team around you that when you like step away from your phone, your laptop, or fly back to home from wherever it is that you are, that there's somebody on the mission, competent, and ready to carry on for you, and that you don't need to focus on it, right? I think that's the most important part. Nobody is able to do this alone. These projects are they're like economies of their own, and they will continue one way or another. So there's no being a workplace hero won't last a long time. So you have to make sure you build the structure team around you such that you can actually take a break. Yeah.
I love that. I love that so much, because it also like speaks to like forcing that protection of someone's recharge time, right? And putting in not only people but the systems, right? Like I like how you highlighted that, because people can trust or not trust a person, but if a system's in place, it will, help build that trust that, the coverage will be there. So I love the way that you frame that up.
You've provided that for me here at PayShepherd, so thank you.
Oh,
Yeah.
welcome.
Yeah. And thank you for taking the time to chat today. It was great to learn about yourself and your background and the perspective that you have on heavy industry.
Thanks for the time, Wes. Appreciate it.